Hey, Tom Jordan here with you for the next hour. Manic Monday, not just here in the studios of Tom Jordan Live, but in the capital city of Michigan. Chaos in Michigan's capital of Lansing. It's lame, in fact, and it doesn't have to be this way. What happened over the weekend, what happened last week, but this is exactly why people do not trust the government and they don't trust politicians. The lame duck session in Michigan, Exhibit A, as to why that is. Democrats, this fleeting political majority pushing through an extreme progressive agenda. It's like one final parting shot of sabotage before they're kicked out of the state. It's legislative chaos is what's happening. 100 plus bills in a single day is what they're trying to push through. And Democrats are cramming through legislation. There's no time for debate. There's no time for testimony. No proper analysis allowed, and Republicans are being silenced throughout the process. The GOP lawmakers being gavelled down. All the questions are being ignored. The debate is stifled. It's authoritarianism is what it is. You got tax hikes in place. States like, Kentucky, they're cutting taxes to attract businesses, but Michigan, hey, they're going to raise taxes to no longer attract businesses to the state. The state is far less competitive than it used to be, business-wise, driving businesses and residents elsewhere. The population is dwindling in the state. Are you doing business in the state of Michigan? Or you run a company, or maybe you're thinking about starting a business in the state where it's said that 4 out of 5 Great Lakes prefer? I think even the Great Lakes are leaving the state of Michigan. It's kind of tough out there, and it's getting more difficult. And I'll get into this with my guest today, who's written about this extensively. Kaitlyn Buss, a columnist and the assistant editorial page editor for the Detroit News. That's coming up in just a few seconds. Also, just a reminder to chime in, comment, ask questions in the comments section. I'll get to those in just a moment. Maybe you can even pose a question to Kaitlyn Buss, and we'll put her on the spot, so to speak, to help you understand what's happening in your state, in the capital. Also, just a reminder, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live, simply subscribe to the podcasts, click the notification bell, and share the content. It's important stuff we're trying to cover that a lot of people are not. And the ones that are, we bring on the program so you're better informed. Informed consent is what we like to prioritize here at Tom Jordan Live. So that means a lot to us. Thank you so much. All right. So you'd think it would be criminal the way that Democrats rule. And it seems that that is what they want to do. They want to rule your life. They have total control. Push through laws that punish the voting public that doesn't want any of this stuff that they're putting through. It doesn't make sense to me and to a lot of others, common sense individuals. For example, Governor Whitmer, her business strategy is to pay businesses hundreds of millions of dollars while simultaneously driving them away with bad policies, high taxes, and overregulation. That's not going to keep them here. And she's like, well, let's give unemployment benefits for half a year. Reward people for not working, not going to work. Let's give them more money on a weekly basis and extend it out to half a year, and then put that cost on the employers. Force business cost on employees of small businesses. Let's make tipped employees earn less money while we pretend they're going to make more. And let the Democrats make staffing decisions for business owners. It's crazy what they're doing. It is authoritarianism, is what my guest talks about. My guest today has, in fact, written the Californication of Michigan is almost complete. It's a great line, and it's true from someone who lived most of his life in California and fled only to see it happen here in this state. Kaitlyn Buss, a columnist and the assistant editorial page editor for the Detroit News. Kaitlyn, it's so nice to have you back. Thank you for getting up with us here on a Monday morning. Appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
So, what do you make of this? I think it was well written the way you said the Californication of Michigan is almost complete. It began a few years ago. What's the point? To me, California, that model is a proven failure.
I agree. The disturbing thing is that not only is the way this is happening, offensive to people who think that Michigan should be a common sense state where there's bipartisanship, but the things that they're pushing are so progressive. California has sunshine. The coastal states that tend to push these progressive policies have other things that draw people to those states. Michigan has lakes, but it doesn't, it's not a warm place to be. We really need a tax environment and a business environment and a pro-growth strategy like Whitmer's been talking about for the past 2 years. The weird thing is that this agenda, she has no control over it. She doesn't seem to. It's affecting economic ideas, cultural, shifts in this state that they want to put in place. The Democrats do before they leave office. I mean, some of these Democrats that already decided, not to seek a second or another term after this. I mean, they don't really have a strong investment in the future. And I think after the election, we saw just immediately they were not going to be open to, considering GOP priorities at this point moving forward. And typically in lame duck, that does happen. The party in control, wants to get some of their stuff through, especially if there's going to be a turnover like this. But it's just been really extreme, like you said, chaotic, and really inconsiderate, I think, of a lot of the members in the legislature.
Oh, very inconsiderate because you have these, as you wrote about, these 100+ bills in a single day. No one knows what's in them. I don't even know if the Democrats fully understand the details of what's in this bill, but they have a much better understanding than the Republicans do. And I've heard from many Republicans who are like, we can't even read these things. And you wrote about this, that our questions can't even, they're not even acknowledged. We're completely ignored throughout the process,
Yeah.
and it's done in secrecy because, as you also wrote about, the chamber was essentially closed. Like the floor down there for, I guess the reason they put out there was that there was some type of a security threat, so they had to do all of this in secrecy. I'm not
Yeah.
buying it
But,
necessarily. Maybe that was the case, but I'm not buying it.
right. And it certainly is their purview to do that. I think, typically in lame duck, I mean, even when they passed right to work, there were protests outside the chamber. That's a very standard part of Michigan's lawmaking process, as is, being out there as a reporter. And it wasn't me, but others who typically stand out there and report on what the chamber is doing. You've had Republicans being gavelled down, like I said, very, very, very poor form, I think, among the colleagues. You had the Republicans walking out, and you have Democrats really, I don't know who read this morning, but going after their leadership and saying, enough was enough. You did not try to even work with some of the more moderate, common sense members of your caucus. And so, I don't know what they'll do this week. I don't know if the Republicans will come back. They, really are trying hard to get some movement on these minimum wage and sick leave laws. But we'll see what happens this week.
That's a very good point. I didn't really think about this until you just brought that up. The fact that they're confronting the Democrats saying, we can't trust you. The way that you have governed over the past 2 years and you're still governing in this lame duck session. It's like, I use the word sabotage because I think that's what they're doing here prior to losing at least their majority in the House. But do you think the Republicans in the House at least are going to, retaliation is not the right word, but showing the Democrats have kind of played their hand here, and they've shown who they really are. That they're not a trustworthy. I know you said a lot of them are not going to be back in office after January and the turn of the year. But do you think the Republicans are going to remember this and be willing to have this cooperative model when they govern in 2025?
I tend to think that they will be a bit more cooperative, and maybe, I don't have a ton to go on except for the fact that they have indicated that they would. There was in the Senate, there was some bipartisan, a piece that I wrote about was sexual assault legislation, extending the statute of limitations for that. And I thought that was a very bipartisan, common sense idea. And some
Hmm.
Republicans did get on board with that. Matt, and they passed it in the Senate. Matt Hall, has been an effective leader in some ways. I don't see him, holding a grudge for too long. I think he does want to get a lot of common sense things done that his constituents and half of Michigan wants to get done. So I would hope that they wouldn't hold that. But of course, all the shenanigans is making it harder. And it's unfortunate to see the kind of behavior. I mean, following the presidential election, not to see this behavior in our legislature, I think is disappointing, for a lot of people too.
It is. It's funny because the media covered this. I thought this was good for the governor to say that she seems to be willing to work with, President-elect Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump cares about Michigan, which is completely opposite of the message she was saying prior to the election. But that being said, that she did come out and make those public statements. If she
Yeah.
signs these radical bills into law, do you think? That kind of disproves that she really is sincere about working with the president-elect. Is that the real Gretchen Whitmer, or did we see the real Gretchen Whitmer in her public statements about a week ago?
Yeah. I thought the tone she struck after the election was more moderate, of course, and she seemed to really have an economic focus. Now, still, we tend to disagree with a lot of her economic ideas. So it's not necessarily, great that that's what she wanted to focus on either. I don't think that ultimately a ton of the super progressive legislation, at least culturally, will end up on her desk. You know, I just don't see that coming together in the next week. But if it does, it would certainly, she's talking out of both sides of her mouth if she signs that stuff, and I would expect her to. Hopefully, they will stay focused on, the things they can achieve as a majority of the legislature, and we'll see what ultimately gets, signed by her after this. But right now, it doesn't sound like a lot of the more extreme things, even the driver's license, for immigrants and the sex ed, some of these things that have really been hot button issues. I don't know that they'll get across the line there. But I do think it's a point that she has lost. She does not seem to have control of this legislative agenda whatsoever, or the message coming out of her party right now.
No, but it was the same message she had, up until
Mhm.
this election and before she was trying to distance herself from, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as well. So, let's talk about some of these things. So, Michigan wants to raise taxes. Not a big surprise for Democrats. That's what they like to do. But, they're looking at these other states like Kentucky, as you mentioned in your piece. They're slashing taxes in Kentucky, and that's having a real time effect on attracting businesses to the state of Kentucky.
Yeah.
And Michigan lost out on a whole slew of business opportunities because, that major Ford project that you touched on as well. Why would Democrats choose these policies, do you think? Or maybe they've talked to you about it. Choose these policies that have been proven time and again not to attract businesses to the state under the guise that they will.
I think Democrats are often well intentioned in hoping that more government money in our communities, in our transit, in our childcare. If we can just subsidize our society, then everyone will have what they need. And it's a well intentioned and great idea. It just doesn't work. And so we've had about 20 years since we tried to implement these high tax, you know poor pension policies that have bankrupted the state before, and now we're going back to them. And I think it's so proven that that is not a pro-growth strategy. It does not attract the businesses here. We have not, attracted any of those huge projects that you mentioned. We've attracted a couple, through the SOAR funding and the MEDC. Those haven't panned out to be even as good as they were promised to be, right? So
Hmm.
we're subsidizing jobs here to the cost of $200,000 per job. It just has not borne out that it's going to work. And I
No.
think they think if we invest in our communities, invest in, take this economic funding and put it elsewhere, then people will come here. But people don't come here without jobs. So you have to have the jobs be first. It's just kind of an unfortunate economic reality that they're ignoring right now.
Yeah, another economic unreality they're ignoring right now is the fact that somehow pensions, the way they're trying to refund the way they did pass when before Governor Snyder got rid of this. And I happen to live in some cities and report in some cities where we saw how these pensions, when they were underfunded, destroyed municipalities, and the city of San Diego was one of them. This people don't understand this. San Diego seems like this, beacon of economic
Mhm.
prosperity. In 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe, they almost were wiped off the mat and almost had to declare bankruptcy, just like Detroit did, because of the underfunded pension system here. And now we have Democrats in Michigan undoing all of the Snyder, era pension reforms that actually stabilized Michigan's finances. And we're talking about, adding up to $20 billion in
Yeah.
liabilities to this. So and from your analysis, what are some of the dangers that we're seeing here? And can this, if it goes through, be undone?
Well, of course, it can be undone. It'll take a long time, and that, it could potentially, I mean, at a minimum, you won't see anything happen for 2 years. And that's if Republicans were able to hold on to the House, take the Senate back, and win the governor's office to get, the control that Democrats have had right now. So it can be undone, but it won't be easy. And in the meantime, there will be a lot of destruction. Um, I think nationally, a lot of states went through this of how do they get out of their unfunded liabilities, about a decade ago. And there was a lot of progress on that. The Snyder reforms were, matched elsewhere throughout the country to get similar states out of those situations. It's a terrible idea to go back to a system in which, the government is having to put, defined contributions into these funds where people don't have control over them. They're not receptive to the market. And the government will be, shelling out money to these pension funds again, crowding out funding for, teacher salaries, other
Mm.
democratic priorities. And in the past, it hurt our credit rating. We've worked really hard to get that back up. So there's a ton of damage that can come over the next 20 years from this. And
Mm.
it's happening in a matter of 3 months here. These ideas were not vetted out. This is not something that has been talked about in the legislature for a long time. And, I think it has a lot of backing from the union. And that's what
Mm.
this legislature has been really receptive to.
Yeah, that seems to be the issue here. So backing from the union, does that also maybe equate to union control over these Democratic leaders in the Michigan legislature? I mean, how involved are the unions in this decision-making process?
hmm I don't know the answer to that. I know, they contribute a lot to a lot of these candidates, and the legislature has taken up a lot of their agenda. So, teacher reforms, district reforms that align with the union have been very popular this legislature. So we know they have a good relationship. This seems like, an obvious one. Even other unions, the UAW has been vocal in saying, don't touch that sick leave. And Democrats are receptive to that.
Yeah, very much so. All right, let's talk about something else because this whole family leave, it sounds wonderful. Family leave, we care about families. The fund that requires employers and employees to share their cost equally. What is this exactly? I know it's been, it affects even small businesses as well. I think under 25 workers. But what is this
Mhm.
exactly, and how might this impact small businesses?
Sure. Well, the legislature did adopt an amend to adopt these rules that had been pushed, by an outside group called One Fair Wage and some other activist groups who want to push the minimum wage up to, I think it's $15. I'm
Mhm.
not even sure exactly what it is over a time frame. Um, and the Supreme Court ruled that this was going to go through, that the changes the legislature had made previously were not acceptable. So it's going to go through, full steam ahead. These minimum wage increases, getting rid of or making the tip wage very different. The sick leave laws, would basically take paid leave arrangements that employers have with their employees right now and upend them. Hospitality in particular, restaurants would be subject to kind of a no show, no call policy that employees can take under these new, more liberal rules. So there's a lot of more technical things that are going to happen. It'll affect everything from manufacturing to small restaurants, other small businesses. So it's kind of a one size fits all policy that employers have resoundingly said we cannot operate under this.
Right.
There's been a ton of pushback from Republican leaders from all the chambers in the state, and the legislature has just not amended it at all to make it more realistic, to make it more approachable for businesses. It could put hundreds of thousands of workers out of business over the duration.
That's just amazing to me. I mean, and I think you're right. I think that's what will happen. I mean, that's if you're running a small business, I mean, you can't afford this kind of stuff. And I think it's going to cost the state like $1.5 billion a year, $1.5 billion every single year. And then you have the government intervening in the decision-making process from the small business. I think it's called the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. So you have
Yeah.
this bureaucratic agency within the state. They're the ones that are going to set the contribution rates for the family leave fund that mandate employers who maybe can't afford this contribute
hmm
to. So
hmm
these bureaucratic agencies, I mean, these are unelected bureaucrats, right? They're making decisions for us.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a very anti-worker philosophy. And I mean, I don't know. This one has stumped me. I don't know why there's no movement on it. Democrats already know what happened to this group of individuals during the pandemic. I mean, they're still trying to respond,
Yeah.
recover from all of that. So it's a really disappointing turn of events. I hope Republicans can force some traction on it, but they don't have a ton of leverage right now. So.
What do you make of the process? I mean, have you seen this before in your years of, writing and, covering various municipalities in the state of Michigan in particular? This kind of, breakneck speed in terms of passing these bills and rushing them through when you're talking about, I think last week it was 181 bills, but more than
Yeah.
100 through in one day. Have you ever seen this before? And is it ever realistic that anybody can read all these bills in that amount of time?
I haven't seen it, but again, I'm not the oldest person out there, but I haven't seen it in recent history. Certainly lame duck is always a contentious time. There's always a lot of unaccountable spending that happens, and the party in control, tries to get what they can. But I think in the past, when Republicans have had that advantage, they've prepared more. There was more debate on the legislation that they attempted to pass during that period. The unique thing about this time is it's just pure chaos. And from day one, I mean, Joe Tate never came out with a clear agenda. Anytime you asked anyone in leadership what was going to happen, they threw their hands up in the air and really let the extreme, vocal progressive part of their caucus take over. And it's been pure chaos, and it's had real personal effects on the members. I think they're starting to take personal offense to the way the schedule has been conducted. And, we're coming up here on Christmas, and people, the election kind of said what we want to have happen in the future. And I think this has been very chaotic, very disrespectful to voters and the lawmakers. And I think that's what's unique about it.
Yeah, it reminds me of when Bill Clinton left office, and was it George W. Bush that came in after him? And all the Clinton staffers in the White House sabotaged the place, and they made all these booby traps and then took off. It's kind of what what's happening here in this Michigan
Yeah.
legislature. Before we leave, we're gonna burn down the place so they can't be effective when they start to govern come the new year. When I was young, my wife and I just got married. Is We were in our 20s. We didn't make a lot of money, very little, and we needed to rent an apartment. Being newlyweds and all that, we were a little nervous because we didn't have the income that might have been required to get a place. But we fill out all the forms, and then the landlord says, well, he determines whether or not we can qualify to make that monthly payment of the rent. It's totally a fair process. We understood how it worked. We weren't offended by it. Thankfully, we got approved. We made our monthly rent and all that kind of stuff. But now in Michigan, there's this new program, and they want to basically restrict landlords from considering these renters' income sources. Like, you can't
Mhm.
know how much they make. You can't
Mhm.
understand where the money is coming from. You just have to rent them a room or a house or an apartment regardless. I mean, that's how I understand this bill. What are the financial realities of that? I mean, what is that ultimately going to do potentially to
Mhm.
landlords? And would they have any recourse if somebody can't pay their rent?
So there's a big attack, I think, going on in the housing debate on landlords. I think this bill would apply to those who have 5 properties or more. So you have to have some volume there. But again, it would not allow landlords to consider sources of income for potential people renting from them. So if if the breakdown is, I rely heavily on government subsidies, maybe Section 8 vouchers, things like that. But I also have a job. Typically, and I've lived this too. The breakdown is, you have to prove you have income to cover that rent, and it can't be from other sources. Whether or not that's fair, I think, should be up to the person renting the space. And
Hmm.
so it's just kind of an egregious, violation of their right to rent their property to those they deem, that are going to take care of it. It's simple stuff. They wouldn't, renters wouldn't be able to sue their landlords if they think that they've been discriminated against for the sourcing of income. So it's a little, wonky and technical. But there are other measures out there to affect landlord rental relationships, as people are trying to negotiate the housing crisis. There's a homeless bill of rights, for lack of a better term, that's been proposed. I don't think that will ultimately pass, but there's a big push to give unhoused people these kind of rights that take away the property rights and other rights of others. So it's a good debate that will continue. But I think it deserves that debate, right? It doesn't deserve to be pushed through lame duck.
Yeah, it doesn't deserve to be done in secrecy. It should be a debate. There should be argument going into this, and that's one of probably the most concerning things that we've seen over the past week or two, however long it's been now in the state, and as we've seen over the past couple of years too. There's been a lot of complaints from the Republicans saying we can't see any of these bills. We're kept out of the discourse when it comes to discussing on the committees and whatnot. Is purely ramming it down the throat. One final question. I'll let you go because I know you're really busy on this Monday, but the election laws in the state of Michigan, that's something that the Democrats are apparently trying to weaken. in the
Yeah.
state, rolling back the safeguards that are meant to really to ensure secure and fair voting. How can
Mhm.
how do you think people can have confidence in our elections when these kind of things are objectively happening right before us?
Yeah. So both the driver's license for illegal immigrants would, contribute to weakening that. I think it's very safe to see how if you have driver's licenses for these, individuals, it's much easier to register to vote according to the, current regulations. They've also introduced legislation to basically, if someone is flagged in the qualified voter file for maybe not living in that jurisdiction or even in the state, that ballot would not be allowed to be challenged. And so it just kind of goes into the system with everything else. Now we saw how that affects the overall integrity because of the Chinese, non-citizen who was able to vote here, and his vote was counted, even though
Yeah.
he's being charged with two felonies now. So sure, he's being punished, but his vote mattered. So all of these mechanisms serve to, make people trust the elections less, even if it's not happening on a widespread basis. Um, so I don't know what they'll continue to do with that. I don't think they'll get traction on those driver's licenses this week. But
Yeah.
we've seen how there are loopholes in Michigan's elections, and no one is trying to close those. Before we end, there is some good legislation
Oh,
too
good.
that
Yes.
deserves to be passed out there. There is an extension of FOIA, that we would love to see get passed. We'd love that to be even stronger, but even Jocelyn Benson came out and supported that. There's, like I said, some sexual assault legislation. So there is some important stuff that needed to get done, and we'll see what ends up crossing the line at the end of
Oh,
this.
good. Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah, the FOIA is a big issue. I know. Hey,
Yeah.
I know I said that was my last question. It's my last question, but we do have somebody here who wants to ask you something. If that's okay, we can bring it up on the screen.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, thanks. It's from Harry Sakalian. Harry's a common viewer, regular viewer here. Good morning, Tom. Please ask Kaitlyn if young people are still leaving Michigan at a high rate due to these policies. Thanks, Harry Sakalian. What do you think? Young people in the state, are they taking off?
You know, I I think so. I would have to look at the most current data. Certainly, we've not had a surge in population growth, and we keep having young people leaving. We keep having messaging about policies, related to abortion and other kind of anti-growth measures, just at their core. And so, I don't think a ton of people look at Michigan as a place to grow a young family right now. It's unfortunate. Hopefully, we can turn that around because we are, I think, still 49th in population growth right now. It's not looking good.
No, it's not. But like you said earlier, California has the sunshine, so they can afford
Yeah,
to do this kind of stuff. We have abortion laws that allow you to have abortions in Michigan in the dead of winter.
right.
Kaitlyn Buss, it's always really, really good to have you. Thank you for your time. A very great columnist. Read her stuff in DetroitNews.com, DetroitNews.com, assistant editorial page editor for the Detroit News. Kaitlyn, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. It's true. The California model, it's a proven failure. I mean, I'm one. I think of millions of people have left that state a while back because of the Californication of California. And now these Michigan Democrats that are embracing these policies that have driven millions out of states like California and New York, high taxes, heavy regulations, bloated social programs. It just makes life unaffordable and business is unsustainable. So you see major businesses flee California for better pastures in Texas or I don't know New Hampshire, maybe Nevada, these places with Florida. All these places that are just more. Tennessee is another one, a big state like Tennessee. That's where they're going, and people are much happier in those states. Michigan could learn from states like our neighbors, Indiana, Ohio. They're not emulating failed states like California and New York. Rushing the legislation, it undermines democracy which they claim to be protecting. They're not. They're acting in secrecy. They're shutting down debate, and they're not allowing dissenting views on these very, very controversial pieces of legislation. And when you got 100+ bills that Democrats are cramming through in a single day without testimony, without debate, without proper review, they're mocking the democratic process. They're mocking you as a citizen of the state. And I want to say this because there are some Democrats who are not in favor of this. In fact, Karen Whitsett, she's been just a common name that has been, think, recognized as a hero within the Democratic Party. Now, she and I would not agree on a lot of policies, but I do agree with her priority to make a decision based on her constituents and her conscience rather than partisan mandate and partisan demands on her. And she decided to pull out, I think it was over the weekend or Friday, to pull out of the voting. And they couldn't form a quorum because there weren't enough legislatures in it because so they couldn't get these things passed through. So Karen Whitsett is a hero in my book, and she's proven herself that in a number of occasions over the past few years, pushing back against her radical far left party, the current iteration of the Democrats, because they are mocking common sense individuals in their state, and that we've seen it throughout the past 4 years in the Biden administration. So, good governance, it requires transparency, it requires deliberation, talking to one another, not these midnight deals, these closed door sessions. If these policies are so vital, why the secrecy? Because they know they're passing by they're not partisan wish lists from extremist organizations and yeah, unions who are just they've given millions to these candidates. If you want to keep running for office, you better get this stuff through. And a lot of these lobbyists are actually writing this legislation. These are not solutions for Michiganders or Michiganians, or if you're Michiganish like myself. Undoing pension reforms, that's financial suicide. I've seen that play out time and again, and they know it, but it's good for the unions and their union members, but it's bad for the state. Michigan worked very hard to stabilize the pension system under Governor Rick Snyder, and it took a long time to do that. And if you want to protect the taxpayers and you want to ensure future sustainability, as Kaitlyn mentioned, we're talking about the next 20 years. We could see the Michigan's economy just if this is not reversed. And again, it takes a lot of time to do that. All the damage they did over the past couple of years, it takes time now, longer than 2 years, to fix it. But you got to do it if you could ensure future sustainability. Reverse these reforms the Democrats did. Democrats are putting the state back on the path to insolvency. And that's where it was under Jennifer Granholm, the former governor, now current Secretary of Energy under Joe Biden. She almost ruined the state of Michigan. They call it the lost years when she was the governor. And then Rick Snyder took over, and he made Michigan, by his policies, a business-friendly state. And now that has been reversed. So much of it has over the past couple of years. It's reckless. They're going to add $20 billion in these liabilities for the pensions. And as Kaitlyn said, it crowds out the funds for schools and services, all to appease these union bosses. Hiking taxes? Who likes that? If you want a competitive economy, it's sabotage, self-sabotage. You're hurting yourself. And you got Kentucky and Ohio, they're cutting taxes. They're attracting investment. And the Michigan Democrats are raising taxes. And they are discouraging growth, and they're going to somehow blame somebody else for it. It's not progress. They call themselves progressives. And what they mean by that term is something entirely different than actual progress. What they mean is progressively steering people away from the foundations of the United States, the foundational values. Let's progress away from those things. Let's slowly undo the Constitution. That's what progressivism means, in order to have a more efficient government that dominates individual civil liberties. And we can go through all these things we already talked about. The expanded unemployment benefits is punishing workers. It hurts businesses, making it easier. I mean, did you remember of those who were working in 2020 and 2021, how many people refused to go back to work? They would not go back to work when there were people were begging for employees. And why was that? Because the government was paying them to stay away from work. That's essentially what these expanded benefits, unemployment benefits, would do. Why go back to work when you've got 6 months of free cash, more than $600 a week that the government is paying you? And you could sit home and, play video games, whatever that is. I've seen that happen time and again. So you gotta prioritize work, and you can't incentivize not working. That would be bad for the economy, and it's bad for individuals as well. There's something about working hard, having a good day's work that builds your confidence in yourself, and it's what we were created to do, is what I believe. All right. So a lot of bad stuff out there going on. All right, let's talk about some headlines here real quick. We're talking about more Michigan stuff, corporate welfare. Michigan, did you know the state of Michigan tops the United States in corporate handouts with little to show for it? We briefly spoke about this with Kaitlyn Buss. Michigan is leading the nation in corporate subsidies, spending more than $2.6 billion on economic incentives from 2018 to 2023. That's more than double second place South Carolina, more than double of South Carolina. Yet the state's return on investment is abysmal, with fewer than 11% of promised jobs materialized, fewer than 11% of the promised jobs ever coming to fruition. And we talked with the Mackinac Center for Public Policy about this the other day, but that is what they came to find out. And another part of the study shows it's more like 9% of these promised jobs materializing. And it's about what it was the state paying. It's about $200,000 per job is what the subsidies equate to. And of course, those jobs don't come out. So we're just paying these companies to do what they will. The taxpayer-funded deals for auto giants like General Motors and Ford they've fallen short, fueling a lot of skepticism. General Motors, after securing $666 million for electric vehicle projects, 666, delayed its Orion Township plant by a whole year. Yeah, just the whole thing was idle until at least 2026, and who knows if it'll start then either because they're not making money. Ford cut its $3.5 billion Blue Oval battery park investment. They surrendered $100 million in incentives to do that. And they said the reason why is because nobody wants these EVs. They're not selling, so we're just going to pull back here, which is what you're supposed to do. If the demand is not there, you pull back. But the problem extends beyond these broken promises. You got Goshen Incorporated. They were approved for $715 million to create this Chinese-owned battery plant, but they're facing, of course, fierce opposition over the Chinese Communist Party ties and environmental concerns as well. And critics argue these secretive, these high-cost deals prioritize corporations over crumbling roads and neglected infrastructure. That's what government should be doing, not getting into private industry. So the incoming Republican House Speaker, Matt Hall, he's demanding transparency. There may be some success in that. There is a shift toward, more road repairs. And Matt Hall called the current policies, 2 decades of false promises. And despite these, Republican wins in November, the lame duck Democrats are pushing another $270 million for these corporate projects. The whole experiment in corporate welfare underscores a dire need for reform and accountability. Something has got to change, or else this state is veering leftward off a cliff. Okay, these drones, let's talk about this. These mystery drones over New Jersey, are they a government experiment? There's a lot of the stuff that came out over the weekend that I started reading, like, well, maybe it is. Maybe they're trying to figure out, how the public will respond if the government needed to check out to see if there was some type of a chemical attack on them. And they're seeing now in real time how the public is responding, right? So for over 3 weeks now, residents across northern New Jersey, they've been really unnerved by these mysterious drones hovering in the skies with no official explanations coming from the government. So there's a former CIA operations officer. Her name is Laura Ballman. She, over the weekend, suggested that the sightings might not be foreign espionage, but rather a classified U.S. military exercise. I tend to agree with her. She spoke on Fox News over the weekend, and she said that she highlighted the peculiar circumstances that National Security spokesman John Kirby's comments, paired with recent discussions about improving our detection systems. And this is likely a classified test of some sort of like kind of urban detection or evasion technologies. So if New York, that's why New Jersey is saying maybe that's why they're doing it in New Jersey, because if this were to happen in New York City, they're testing how they can respond to it and detect some type of attack, but not letting the public know about it. There's a lot of frustration over Joe Biden's administration, their neglect to be transparent about this, and the government's silence. It's very troubling. And, she says, and I agree, that transparency would alleviate that public anxiety. If this is a test, let us know about it instead of denying it and, gaslighting the American public. So despite the reassurances from officials that the drones are not violating laws, the Pentagon has yet to provide clear answers. Who believes that they don't know what's going on? Anyone? Bueller? No, I don't either. There's been 5,000 tips that have flooded the FBI, but fewer than 100 warranted, serious investigation. So that's what they figured out. Then they investigate them. But, Homeland Security officials downplaying the sightings here, calling the national reactions slightly overblown. I think it makes people even more skeptical with because they have not been forthcoming about a lot of things. Not the least of which was the southern border saying there's nothing happening down there. There's no crisis. What are you talking about? We're Department of Homeland Security. We'd know if there was. In the meantime, maybe tens of millions of people have been flooding across the border. So that's just one example why we don't trust the government nowadays. A lot of people in New Jersey very concerned about what's happening. They don't feel like um, they're being informed. And this all goes to play with Joe Biden's "you don't need to know" presidency. That's been his tactic. We don't need to tell you anything. We've got it under control. Mind your own business. Butt out. So these mysterious drones hovering over New Jersey have really become the perfect metaphor for the Biden administration's secrecy. David Marcus wrote something this morning that I read in FoxNews.com. He said that for weeks, these giant drones, some of the size of minivans or SUVs, have been unsettling residents as officials claim ignorance on this. But he contends that, listen, this is a White House that has spent 4 years telling Americans that you don't need to know what's going on. Think of the Chinese spy balloons or whatnot. And you talk about, Joe Biden's mental acuity. They covered that up, saying he's fine. He's one of the most, mentally rigorous individuals we've ever worked with. Who believed that? His stance on pardoning Hunter Biden, of course, that was the end of his presidency. The administration has consistently stonewalled or deflected the entire time, even in 2021, when breakthrough COVID cases raised alarms. It's only the unvaccinated. No, there are breakthrough cases from the vaccinated that we need to pay attention to. And then remember, Press Secretary Jen Psaki, she responded to a basic question with, "Why do you need that information?" Well, because we're the public, we're governing, not you, and you need to tell us what's going on. So whole attitude is emblematic of a presidency more focused on controlling narratives than providing transparency. We do hope that all of that changes. And President Trump over the weekend, he said, we're going to make sure everyone knows what's going on with these drones when he takes office. This guy, John Kirby, if you've seen him speak, he is just, I mean, who can trust this guy? He's like, he mocks American people when he's up there saying, oh, no, remember what he said about Afghanistan? John Kirby says, I never saw any chaos on the ground. I don't know what you're talking about out there. There was no crisis. This was a very successful retreat from Afghanistan. This was what he was telling people from the Pentagon in order to control the narrative and pretend like we're all crazy when we know full well, as does the rest of the world, what Joe Biden did and how he failed that withdrawal out of that state. And he gave control to the Taliban, said that would never happen. And in 2 days it did. They overran Kabul. So this guy, John Kirby, is just a spin doctor. Somebody called him a spinster the other day, but that's something else entirely. But he is a spin meister, spin doctor, whatever you want to call him. He's assuring reporters now with these drones that they pose no threat. I might believe that actually, because I think what they're doing here is I agree with that former CIA agent that this is some type of, exercise by the U.S. government. But they're just not telling us that. John Kirby did admit that officials don't know their origins. I'm not buying that. Which is a total contradiction. If he doesn't know the origin, how does he know they're not a threat? It's absurd. As David Marcus pointed out, you should read his thing this morning. It's at foxnews.com, I believe is where it is. If you don't know what they are, how can you know that they're harmless? These drones, it's all symbolic and emblematic of a deeper issue here. The government that believes Americans can handle the truth As Jack Nicholson famously once said in a movie, you can't handle the truth. Actually, try us. I think we can. Well, we can't handle your constant lies and gaslighting when we know something is going on. We're not stupid. So, as President elect Donald Trump prepares to take office, he has promised to shoot down a drone if its answers are not forthcoming. It's a stark contrast to the secrecy of the outgoing administration. Good. That'd be a welcome sign. Also, a welcome sign is that Christopher Wray is resigning. That's good. Scars of an FBI weaponized against families. That was his legacy, I believe. Even though some people say, "Oh, yeah, Christopher Wray, he's a conservative." Well, he didn't operate like one, and he was absolutely part of the weaponization, in my view, of the Department of Justice and the FBI. And Christopher Wray's resignation as the FBI director may be a headline politically, but for families like, remember this guy Mark Houck and this guy Paul Vaughn, the trauma that the FBI inflicted on their lives and on their families, it's not going to fade so easily. Houck was this pro-life activist, and he was the guy. He had that chilly, early morning raid at his home in Pennsylvania back in 2022. Without warning, agents pounded on his door. They were shouting aggressively. And when Houck finally opened the door, he was met with a dozen armed agents. These, M16 rifles were drawn, and his children were watching in like terror over this. Their crime was simply trying to rescue babies and offering alternatives to abortion. Like, have you thought of adoption? You can't say that, that kind of thing. So they go to their house armed, pointing weapons at his head, essentially. And for what? For offering alternatives to abortion. Somehow that was deemed at that time a major threat to individuals, when the opposite was true. Is trying to rescue individuals. So their life spiraled after that. This was a very, very decent family, and that federal charges came their way. All these smears from the dishonest media, public smears, and all this financial losses to fight this, and not to mention the emotional toll that has left lasting scars in the family. That the panic attacks they were describing, sleeping disorders, shattered sense of safety under that guy's watch, Christopher Wray. And then there was Paul Vaughn. He is a father of 11 kids. It was a similar situation in 2022. It was the same year. The FBI, these agents there, they swarmed his Tennessee home and detained his children at gunpoint. What did he do? Vaughn was peacefully reading the Bible outside an abortion clinic. That's what he was doing. That was the big threat. So there's something called the FACE Act. If you know what that is, you're not allowed any longer to block access to an abortion clinic. All right. Or actually, it's not just an abortion. It's any medical facility whatsoever. You're not allowed to protest in the way of somebody who wants to go inside. That's the FACE Act. The problem is they never applied that to all these other places, these crisis pregnancy centers, other areas where people were protesting outside. They didn't apply it then. They only applied it to abortion clinics for the vast majority of the charges. And now he's a convicted felon under house arrest. He can't travel freely. He can't vote because he read the Bible in the pathway of an abortion clinic. That shouldn't be allowed. That is a total violation of the Constitution, by the way. You can't do that. And he wasn't pushing or shoving anybody. He was just standing there, reading the Bible peacefully. So Christopher Wray, the departure of him, a little solace, I think, for these families. Their stories are, this is revealing of an FBI that's been weaponized, not to protect citizens, but to intimidate dissenters, essentially. And now we get these broken homes, you got eroded freedoms in their wake, and also a total lack of trust in the government, the FBI, the Department of Justice, legislatures across the country, just like we're seeing in the state of Michigan. All right, those are your headlines I wanted to get to today. Let's get some comments here if we have any right now. Cameron Harris is looking, he's scouring, he's beating the bushes to find out if anybody's commenting or asking questions. All right, let's bring them up one by one. We got a few here. It's Annie. Hi, Annie. Good to see you. As always, 100 plus bills a day. That should be illegal. It should be. I think it's criminal. I agree with you. No wonder the GOP walked out. How are our representatives doing due diligence? That's great. They're not. I mean, I know it's a rhetorical question there, Annie, but they're not doing due diligence. They don't want due diligence. They don't want informed consent. And that's just been their MO since they've been operating all together. You can apply that to almost anything. It's not just abortion, informed consent for very serious surgical procedures. No, we're not going to tell you all the potential risks. We're not going to tell you that side of the story. Only one side will fit the narrative. And that's what they're doing here. In fact, they don't want to tell you what's actually in this bills that you, Mr. or Mrs. Legislator, have to vote on right now without reading it. Go ahead. Because we got 99 more coming down the pike. Hurry up. That was their attitude. And it should not be allowed, and you're right, it should be criminal. Maybe the Michigan legislature, with this incoming, GOP majority in the House, should create laws where there is a specific amount of time that has to, by law, is required to consider these bills, and a certain number of debates have to occur. And you can't gavel down your opponent just because you don't want to hear their views on what exposes or what's exposed inside these pieces of legislation. Annie, thanks so much. All right, let's bring up another one here. It's Taz. Hey, Taz. Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. Gretchen Whitmer has the misguided notion, if you tax it, they will come. She and her Democrats continue to destroy Michigan. No, you're right about that. I just don't know if, I don't know if that's really I know the stated intent is if you tax people and you raise taxes and you give out money to people, it will entice them to come to the state. I know that's what they say publicly, but I do not believe they think that's true. I'm a little more skeptical on that. I mean, Kaitlyn Buss is as well, but I think, she had mentioned that there are some good intentioned Democrats. I agree. I do think there are some good intentioned Democrats, but as a whole, I don't think they truly believe this is going to help anybody other than their coffers, those who have donated to their campaigns, those who they want to remain in power. In one example would be unions. Unions are starting to control more and more the entire state of Michigan. They control your education. If you're going to public schools, it's the unions who are saying, yeah, let's not hold teachers accountable because they're members of our union and we don't want them to ever be at risk of losing their job. So no more tests. There's seniority. If you've been here a number of years, it doesn't matter how bad you are as a teacher, you've got a job for life. That's the union way. Security for your job, regardless of how you're performing. And I'm not saying that teachers are all bad. There's plenty of great teachers in public schools. That's not what I'm saying. But the unions should not have the control over parents. They shouldn't be hiding information from parents. They shouldn't be hiding the information that their 14-year-old kid has changed his or her name and his or her agenda and decided to get an abortion without the parents being told. In fact, that would be against the law if a teacher were to inform the parents about what's happening with their minor children. Who gives the government this kind of control? The government does not care about your kids more than parents. They don't. Yet they are the ones that are pulling the strings here now and directing your children's lives. That's just one of many, but based on these radical Democratic policies that are being pushed through the Michigan legislature. Hey, Taz, thanks for that. Appreciate it very much. Let's bring up another one here. It is Walter Duro. Hey, Walter. I see you a lot on X out there. There exists an entire industry devoted to advocating and procuring corporate welfare. A free market is betting at picking winners and losers. Sadly, the Michigan legislature's voting record shows corporate welfare is bipartisan. You're right about that. SOAR and RTA, for example, were created by Republicans. I agree. Yeah, it's on both sides, Walter. You and I agree on more than I think you realize based on some of your statements about me on X. But that's fine. I don't mind disagreements either. I don't mind pushback. But you're correct. This has been a bipartisan issue. Same with the FOIA issue. Why is it that legislators, both the House and the Senate in Michigan, and the governor are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act? That should never occur. There's only 2 states in the country where that's allowed. That's Michigan and Idaho. And I think Idaho is now reversing that. I'm not sure what the latest is there. That would leave Michigan as the least transparent state in the country. That's just one example why. But when it comes to these subsidies, you're correct. There were a number of Republicans in support of this. But to give the Republicans credit, there were Republicans who were pushing back much harder against this than I think any Democrat that was out there at all. Some of the Democrats didn't like some of the environmental impacts of Goshen, for example, getting all these subsidies and building a plant, electric battery plant in the state of Michigan, which is, obviously in league with the Chinese Communist Party. But Republicans were vehemently opposed to that. You didn't hear, I don't think, any Democrats really, other than for the environmental reasons, push back against that plant. So, yeah, you're right. It was bipartisan, but there are far more Republicans who are pushing back against these radical ideas than the Democrats. I'm not a partisan. And I think, Walter, I think you're a libertarian. That's fine. But I'm not partisan. I'm more independently minded. It just so happens that more Republicans right now in this time in history agree more with my positions than the Democrats by far. All right. Thanks for that, Walter. Good to hear from you. Let's bring up another one here. It's Christopher Jakulski. Hey, Christopher, how are you? I reached out to Paul Wojno and Nate Shannon to vote no on all these bills they are ramming through. So far, not even a form reply. Crickets. Well, Christopher, good for you at least reaching out to them. More people need to do that, but you're right. I don't think really, truly that they care about it, because if they did care, they would understand, all right, Michigan voters did not vote for this stuff. We're only voting it because we are so far left in our ideology that we want this to go through despite what the people want. That is a far leftist perspective. It doesn't matter what the people want. We know better than they do. So we're going to ram this through for what we believe to be their own good, which is not really their own good. It's for their own power, the legislators. So yeah, you're right. I'm sorry they didn't get back to you, but I do commend you for reaching out. All right, let's bring up another one. We got two more here. The engineer is back. Hey, buddy. I'm buddy. I don't know if you're male or female. The engineer, you and I have never met, I don't think, unless you're in disguise. But the engineer is on a great supporter on Patreon. I appreciate you very much, and very actively involved in this podcast. So thank you. In March, I'll be 55 and eligible to retire. I own a condo in Florida and will change my residency. I would no longer have to pay income tax in Michigan. I'm frustrated. The engineer, I'm with you on the fact that I'll be 55 in January. So I'm a little bit older than you are, the engineer. But I do sympathize with you that you had to buy a condo. You own a condo now, but you're going to have to change your residency down there just to have a little bit more fiscal freedom. And it's a shame. I do hope wouldn't that be wonderful if one day Michigan became a income tax-free state? Well, what a blessing that would be. It's not going to happen, I don't think, ever, because we don't have the argument is that, we're not a Florida. We don't have the sunshine to attract people here regardless if we tax or not. But I don't know. It would be nice. So I feel your frustration. The engineer, good to hear from you and see you. All right, let's bring up another one here. We have Vaughn Westerby. Hey, Vaughn. The media is supposed to be the watchdog of government. Yeah, they're supposed to be. Whitholm has rubber stamped everything. I think you mean Whitmer. Whitholm, Granholm. I see what you did there. Yep. Took me a second. Has rubber stamped everything the Dems have proposed. What makes anyone think she won't have her pen ready to sign anything they propose? That, to me, Vaughn, is the big test here. If she was really sincere about her wanting to work with Donald Trump because she now believes somehow Donald Trump, which he does, cares about Michigan, but I don't know if she really believes that. I think it's a political talking point, but let's give her the benefit of the doubt. If she believes that, that means she will not sign this radical legislation that's going through, because people that supported Donald Trump, which he admitted in this state, the people of Michigan voted for him, so I want to work with Donald Trump. If you're sincere about that, you will not sign these pieces of legislation. Most of these things will be vetoed by Governor Gretchen Whitmer. If she does that, I will gain some respect back that I've lost from her for the past several years. One more. Let's bring it up. Harry Sakalian is back. Tom, regarding the drones, Let's ask Elon, Harry Sakalian. What does Elon think about that? That's a good question. Again, I think the drones, the government is fully aware of what they are because they're the ones putting them up in the air. And I think what they're doing is an exercise. I think there's been enough intelligence people that are kind of in the know, some that have worked in this kind of field of this drone management and the very narrow field. When you're working in that field, I read this great thread yesterday, or the day before, regarding an expert said this: what they're doing right now is that they are surveilling New York City as an exercise to see to a couple things to see how the public will react to all these drones up in the air. So that's one purpose, to find out how we're going to approach this, and two, to see how effective they are at detecting a threat within a major urban area like New York City. And that's why we're seeing this in New Jersey, because they're right off on the other side of the river from New York. So anyway, Elon Musk, he probably knows something more than we do, doesn't he? Appreciate the comments a lot, and I appreciate our guest today, Kaitlyn Buss with the Detroit News. We'll be back here tomorrow for another edition of Tom Jordan Live. Remember, you can catch us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on X, Facebook, and YouTube. Until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. God bless you. Have a great day.